Well, welcome everyone to the Mary Baker Eddy Library and to our program this evening on women in military ministry. My name's Jonathan Eder and I produce programs here at the Mary Baker Eddy Library. And tonight's program is the third and final program in a series that we've been holding this winter called Paths of Peace in Crisis. And it keeps coming to be literally true for us. I didn't expect a citywide blackout to be part of the agenda and concept for the programming, but we were prepared in developing this theme. The programming that we've been holding relates very much to our exhibit downstairs, which is called Finding Peace. And actually, this program is kind of a signal that that exhibit is about to come to a close. In fact, it'll be going down at the end of this weekend. But the whole concept of finding peace really very much relates to the focus and topic this evening on women in military ministry. When the exhibit team was first developing the concept for the exhibit, the initial idea was on war and peace. But as we looked at the writings and thought of Mary Baker Eddy on the subject of peace and other great peacemakers that would be treated and looked at in the exhibit, it became clear that peace for her and for them meant something so much more than just the absence of war, or in contrast to war, that it was in its own right really a power and an activity and a pursuit. And so the title of the program shifted from War and Peace, the title of the exhibit shifted from War and Peace to Finding Peace as an ongoing, cherished effort. And that was really so much a part of Mary Baker Eddy's mission. And it is so much a part of the mission of people who are in military ministry. Mary Baker Eddy's life in 19th century America and 19th century New England in many ways also has a lot in common with what women in military ministry have had to engage with. In her time, it was considered anathema for a woman to be in a position of leadership in religion, to be somebody articulating and advancing an original spiritual insight. She met a lot of resistance, and many people didn't feel that she belonged. And in researching this subject of what we're going to be talking tonight on, women in military ministry, that same sort of attitude has prevailed and met so many of the people who've gone into this profession that they don't really belong there. And yet at the same time, through Mary Baker Eddy's efforts in her time and through the efforts of women in military ministry, what was revealed was that the standing order was neglecting certain deep felt needs, and that this new voice and that this new perspective and that this new consciousness was able to address and help fulfill that sense of mission all the more thoroughly by bringing women into this fold and into this field. So it's really a great pleasure to be able to have three women tonight to share their stories and to share their experience about what it has meant to them and really what it has meant to us as well as to the United States military, to have them break open and be trailblazers in this field of endeavor. It's been interesting to see how much interest this program has generated. Today, I received emails from Washington State and from Louisiana, from Maryland about the program, calls from Maryland. But a couple hours ago, I got a call from Paris, France, which really kind of stood out to me, from somebody in Paris who was so disappointed she couldn't be here at the program. So you should all feel very lucky that somebody from Paris is envious of you for being here. Well, anyway, I'm so delighted to be able to introduce to you our panel this evening. Immediately to my left is Janet Horton, who was one of the very first women to go into military chaplaincy. In 1974, they changed the application form to become a chaplain in the United States military and took out as a requirement the word male. And so in 1976, Janet joined the United States Army as a military chaplain, as the fourth woman ever to be in that branch of the armed services as a military chaplain. Just before her entering into the armed services in the Army branch was Diana James. She came in as the third woman ever to serve as a chaplain. And remarkably, Samantha was the first. I don't know. No. No, she is the first of the next wave, of the new wave of women to go into the military chaplaincy. And she'll be bringing a contemporary, a current perspective on what all that means, and perhaps giving some insight into what is the same for women in this field today and what maybe is different. Janet represents the Christian Science tradition and was a Christian Science chaplain in the United States Army. And she is now an endorser, and that is somebody who reviews and trains new candidates to go into the military chaplaincy, and she's an endorser for Christian Scientists who are interested in pursuing that career. Diana, since retiring, is now an interdenominational pastor and works and serves in that regard. And Samantha is just really beginning. She's embarking. As you can see, she's United States Air Force, and she's at the Andover Newton Theological School at the moment, studying and pursuing her Master's of Divinity degree. But this summer will be beginning her intensive training at Maxwell Air Force Base in Montgomery, Alabama. As part of her Master's Divinity training, she did an oral history project on women in military ministry. So she's already gotten a sense of the history, and we're interested to hear about what her perspective is on the future based upon that. So I'm going to turn it over to you three and bring us back, Janet, to 1976 and what it all meant back then to be a woman in military ministry.
Where the law had changed the idea that women could be in the military, this was still something that was very much a new idea to the men who were in the military. And I've often used the metaphor that I felt like we had that honor of being part of a birth of a new idea, and that it maybe was unrealistic to think that there wouldn't be some labor pains with it. And where women were being integrated into other branches, I think people realized, well, this is my opinion that you should be here or you shouldn't be here, and then somebody else realized it was just their opposing a human opinion. It took on a very different edge in the chaplaincy, because for many people, what we would hear from male chaplains was, God told me you shouldn't be here. So it was a bit different feel of that. I had two experiences that I thought taught me pivotal life lessons in that regard, and those are the two that I illustrate what I felt I learned in that entire time of being integrated. The first one was I was at the chaplain school, and you go back for military education, and after about 4 years you go back for what's called your chaplain advanced course. And what you find is you're there with 237 people, and many of you don't know each other. And so you don't know each other's story. And so people are just going on what they see visually. And we were coming out of a big meeting, and a young man came up to me, and he looked at, we were in a very dress uniform, and so you were wearing all of your awards. And he didn't know my story. He didn't know what amazing things had happened at my first two assignments, and how I had been involved at some very high-ranking levels to institute installation-wide programs or something new in the military. And he could not understand why he was seeing such high-ranking awards on my jacket. And he came up to me, and I think it was just more an emotional reaction on his part. He looked at me and he said, "You can't have possibly deserved those awards," and he spit on me. Now, I don't know, I'm always shocked at how many people, when you say how many people in the room have been spit on you, and you have a whole bunch of people raise their hand. But I've always said the first time is the hardest. And for me, I wasn't meaning to be this funny, no. For me, you learn so much that first time that it makes the other times not so hard. And you probably couldn't count up how many times metaphorically you were spit on. I'm just talking about physically being spit on. And for me, it was probably, the way I describe it is it's a very disgusting feeling to have somebody spit on you physically. And my reaction to it was a lot like a gas grill lighting up. And it was just, it was just so disgusting. And I was very concerned what I might do. And we didn't even know each other's names hardly, other than we had a name tag on. And so I really had to turn to God so quickly. And a thought from the Christian Science textbook came to me. Mary Baker Eddy stated, if you do not handle evil in the very first instance, it will handle you in the second. But the way I heard it, because of the urgency of what I was feeling, was, if you don't handle this in the first instant, I knew I needed to get my heart and my head in control. And so I just turned to God with all my heart. And the thought that came to me was, the soldiers spit on Jesus. And pretty much at that, it pretty much quenched that sense of inflammation that I was feeling. The second thought that came to me was, when you said you wanted to follow me, did you think I meant only in the easy footsteps? Which was, any of these experiences will humble you. I love Mary Baker Eddy said that you can never be too humble or too grateful. And that's what I feel like this experience helped me to understand, is those are two things. If you want to be in the ministry and you want to be a part of bringing peace and ministry to people's hearts, you have to know what it's like to love mankind despite what's going on. And it was so interesting because it was just as if where all that fiery sense of anger or disgust or whatever had been so completely quenched, then my heart turned in a totally different direction, and the thought came, what must a man have been through in order to bring himself to spit on another human being? And I found myself just reaching out and putting my arms around him and saying that to him. And I think because for him it had just been an emotional reaction, when I said that to him, it was like you could see it hitting him like a brick in the face what he had done. And he fell to his knees and he began to beg me to forgive him. And I said, well, of course I would forgive you. And so that kind of put everything else into perspective. And so it was very much an illustration of what could have been a very horrible situation, a very adversarial situation. God can make a situation of peace because God always has that answer of peace if we listen. And so I felt like that was my part, was to be the person who listened. The second experience was very helpful. A bunch of us chaplains and military people do this all the time, is they have to run every day, and so we were out in the desert and we were running out, and we didn't know the desert. We were ignorant of anything, and we had no idea that this little hill that we wanted to run around was not 4 or 5 miles out there. It was probably 40 or 50 miles out there. It just was an illusion. So we didn't realize that we'd run out so far into the desert that we were way out beyond where anything was. And then we realized we weren't any closer and we had to run back, so maybe we should turn around. So we flipped around and we were running back in. And when I run, I don't like to think about, okay, my feet are moving for the 10,000th time. I like to think about something spiritual. And so I was thinking through in my thought about the Bible lesson that morning, and it was about Caleb going in to espy out the promised land. And it was such a beautiful, I was just so wrapped up in it, I wasn't paying attention. So when this pack of wild coyotes came after us, I didn't see them. The guys saw the pack of wild dogs coming. And I probably should back up, because when we started this run, these guys didn't really know me either. And they said, well, we're going to run out there probably 10 miles. And they said, can you hang in there with us? And I said, well, with my infantry group, I'm running, 6.5 to 9 miles. I think I can do that. So they had some concern about it to begin with. And where we had encountered this pack of wild dogs, there was a place where they had started a new housing area, and so there were 2 brick walls and there were 2 trees. And so when the men saw the dogs coming, they got up on the wall and they were up in the trees. Well, I'm now surrounded by the pack of wild dogs, and they're circling, and as they as they circle and growl, I could identify who the lead dog was, because if he pulled in, then the group would tighten and they would circle a bit more and growl. And so, again, in these situations, which could be very difficult, I'm just going to use the word difficult, it's so natural for someone who's in the ministry to turn to God and say, what can I, what is it I'm going to learn here, or what is it I need to know? And it was as if a voice spoke and it said, you get down and you talk to the lead dog. And so I got down on one knee, and again, it was easy to identify him. So I got down on one knee and I began to talk to the lead dog. And when I did that, because I was down on one knee, he laid down. And then when he laid down, all the other dogs laid down. And they got almost all of Genesis 1. But it was so perfect for the situation, because I started, explaining that God created the heaven and the earth, and that he did divide the light from the darkness, and that he had created all the beasts of the field. And I made sure that they understood that God saw everything he made, and behold, it was very good. And I was just talking to that lead dog, and he was just listening. And I said to him, God made you with a purpose, but it wasn't to harm me. And I said, he made you with a he made me with a purpose, and it wasn't to harm you, and he made you with a purpose, and it wasn't to harm me. And I said, but you need to go back to your right place, and it's not here. And I pointed to the lead dog, and I said, you need to get up, and you need to go back out there where you belong. And he popped up and ran off, and all the dogs ran off with him. Well, at this point, the men are coming down out of the trees, and it was interesting because they began to do what I called fess up. And so one of the guys said, we really didn't think women should be in the military, and we certainly didn't think Christian Scientists should be military chaplains. But the guy says, but if you can preach to wild dogs and they'll listen, I'll bet soldiers will. So he was grasping that something different had happened here. And it was interesting because for the first time, the women got to meet as a group a few months after that, and this story kind of went through the chaplaincy. People had heard about it, and so one of our friends said to me, she said, well, now, Janet, she said, were you in more danger from the dogs on the ground or the dogs in the trees? But again, if you are going to learn something from these situations, you have to see things more spiritually. And I think that was exactly what Caleb did. Caleb did not look at this land that everybody else said would devour its people and was a horrible place, and there was giants and they would kill you. He looked and he saw a promised land, a land that flowed with milk and honey. And that's what I think those of us who were able to go through those very difficult times saw, that peace that you would gain, saw what you would learn. And so there was a different report. And I said, no, Donna, I said, the reason I'm here to tell you this story is I knew I was in no danger from the dogs on the ground or those wonderful children of God in the trees. And so I just felt like there were so many things you learned. And again, that answer of peace is what turned things. Now, I have to tell you, I met Diana the very first day of basic training. And the first thing that struck me was, here's a woman who is so pure. And the spirit of love that she presented was so striking. I mean, you couldn't, it didn't take 2 minutes to realize that. And as time went on, what I loved about Diana, I'm sorry, I get emotional when I talk about Diana, was that she had such a sense of dignity. And so when she got in the tough situations, it was the dignity, the spiritual dignity that she expressed that brought out the dignity in the people she met. And we've always felt like sisters. We pinned on each other's promotions. We were at each other's retirements. And so I couldn't be happier than to turn things to Diana.
Well, I am blessed to be here today for many reasons. God has been very, very, very good to me. In spite of all that I have been, when I came to the Lord and gave myself to him, he in turn said, I'll make you a blessing for me. And by that, I began to live constantly knowing, well, what do you want me to do then? Because as a sinner, you know how we feel, that we're unworthy and we are unlovable, etc. But when I went on my knees and prayed during an all-night prayer service, the Lord spoke to me and said, now I want you to go and tell my other sisters and my sons and my daughters If I can do it for you, I can do it for them. And I said yes to the Lord. And when I said it was the most frightening thing that I've ever done, because after that, during the all-night prayer service, when I had this relationship with the Lord, that he said, yes, he's calling me to do his bidding. So I thought he was talking to somebody else, and I turned to the other person and said, did the Lord tell you something? And he says, no. I said, are you sure? And he says, I am sure. And I thought, well, Father, maybe if you're calling me and if you're going to fix me and make me ready to do your will, I'm willing to go. And I want to tell you that I'm sitting here only today because of what God has done. And he has asked me, and I told him what I owe it to him is to go out and tell others. If he can do it for me, he can do it for you. I had a lot of strikes against me. In fact, I'm writing a book now, and one of my first sentences in my book, my lead sentence, my thesis is going to be, I was one most unlikely to succeed. I was considered to be one most unlikely to succeed. However, I became one of the first female chaplains in the history of the United States Army to have made major, because up to that point they were going up to as far as captains, and then they would have to leave. They wasn't promotable. Something always come up. There was always something wrong with them. They were never good enough. I was the third one and the first one to come up for the third one to come up, and certainly I passed, and I was like, oh, Father, is this you? I could tell that it was just only God can do these kind of things. Man doesn't want it to happen, but God said it has to happen. So I accepted that as a sign from the God, and that yes, he did call me. I was the one, and was no mistake. And then when it's time for lieutenant colonel, I knew full well that if I made major, it's not going to happen now. They met for major and lieutenant colonel, and don't you know, I was selected. So this is the second time I'm the highest ranking. And the only reason prior to Janet being the highest, because I got on duty before her only 2 days before, but it puts you in a different zone. And so I'm thinking, well, I guess this is God too. However, when I met Janet, I knew full well we had that same guy that was talking to me was talking to her. And I found out she was Christian Scientist, and I was Church of God in Christ. How many of you ever known any Church of God in Christ in here? Raise your hand. Well, you know how we are, right? or how they are. So anyway, as a result, we became like real sisters. I mean, if I needed Janet, I made it because of Janet was with me. She was much younger. I was much older. I came in at 39 years old. The cutoff was 40 years old. And I thought I was going to come in to be a Christian education teacher because I had a master's of divinity, and God had done that for me as well. But they said, no, we would need you as a chaplain. Sound like you the type of woman we could use as a chaplain. So when that happened, I had to say yes to the Lord because he got me here, so he's going to certainly take me the rest of the way. So as a result, when Janet and I were still together on our first day at basic, and the next year we went, and years after we had advanced, and we were always together, but I got my encouragement from her, and I guess she got her encouragement from me. But the God that we serve is still able. And I want to share with you some of the things that God even said to me, even during this whole time. It was all about me, not alone ever, but God was on my side. And when Elder Jonathan was asking us and telling us what this was about, I said, well, this is what God had told me a long time ago when he saved me and when he sanctified me and when he cleaned me up. Then I told him that I would live for him. And not only that, I said, then I'll go and tell others, but as you did it for me, you can do it for them. And as a result, this is one of my second time of being asked to come out just to talk about my story. I've gone places, and when I go there, I tell them, look, I can tell you about Elijah and Jacob and the Hebrew boys and all that. But you need to know what God has done for me so that you can know that he can do it for you in this day and time. In the biblical days, it happened, but he has done it here. And to be a chaplain in the United States Army, I'm positive you got to know him for yourself. And this is some of the things that I'm going to tell you about is how I know him for myself. Janet knows him for herself. This young lady that's coming in, God bless her, she will get to know him for herself. And nobody can, can do it unless you have it inside of you. So some of the things that I've been asked to do in the military, they have not been fun things. In fact, when I went to my first duty station, I'm going to share one or two. We have a couple of minutes to say whatever we need to say. But I went my first duty station in Fort Carson, Colorado. And it was in came in 76, and that was my first duty station. Females, it was 2 females already in, but they weren't doing as well as they wanted them to do, and some of them had to get out. But I was the 3rd female chaplain. So I get to Fort Carson, Colorado, and now I'm thinking, I'm here now. The Lord is with me. All is well. Well, it was well, and they started doing making what do you call it, I guess it's the assignments for who's going to do what on what Sunday. So this was a Sunday. It was a Protestant service, and they had me down to be on the platform and to do maybe bring the message. They had one young man, 2 other men, and one of them went to the boss, the installation chaplain, and said, "I'm sorry, I can't be there." He said, "Why can't you be? This is your duty station." He said, "No, my denomination does not allow us to be on the podium ministering with a female. Wasn't nothing about being black with a female. And I've already had my day as being black, of course. I've already walked with Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. As a young lady. I'm a witness. I was there in Washington, D.C. I was around the Lincoln Memorial. But that was for my race. But now it was my sex. And so he said, "What do you mean you can't be?" And he said, "Well, I just can't do it." So as a result, they allow him not to minister. They put somebody else there. But you take it and you smile and you say, "God, it's you that's doing this for me. I don't have to take the fame nor the blame. All the glory and the honor must go to you." So that has been my stance. So when Jan met me, it was just always the glory of God. God put me there and he placed me there, and he's going to keep me and he's going to use me there. And just to show you how things can change from the way when I was in first duty station at Fort Carson, Colorado, I had my next duty station. I went overseas to Korea. Then I came back, and then I went to Germany, and then I came back from there, and they sent me to Fort Bragg, North Carolina. When they sent me to Fort Bragg, my job was to work at the hospital. I was the chief of pastoral care and hospital ministry. I had 4 chaplains under me by this time. I'm a major now, and they have these chaplains under me. Well, when I go there, I work for a precious doctor that knew the Lord. And what he required of me, my place of duty, the first Monday of every week was to be with him on my knees in prayer, asking God's blessing to be upon this hospital, to take care of every patient, every staff, every personnel, be there with us. And as a result, when he was ready to go to his change of command, he was going to leave there, and another doctor was going to come in. His name was Dr. DeWitt, the one I was working with. But they were going to change him and put someone else in place of him. Well, as a result, he came to me, and he called me on the phone, and my secretary answered. And they said, "Chaplain James, you went on the phone." I said, "Well, who is it?" "Colonel DeWitt." I said, "Yes." "Okay." I dropped everything. I said, "Sir, what is it?" He said, "You haven't heard the weather report?" I said, "Well, no." He said, "They said it's going to rain." I said, "Sir, what do you want me to do about it?" I didn't have a clue. I'm serious. He said, "Pray." I said, "Yes, sir." Now, sometimes you got to bring us back to where we're supposed to be. But this is what the man, so I said, "Yes, sir." And you know what the Spirit said? "Come on with me." And I went to my chapel. I got on my knees in my BDUs, and I said, "Lord, you've got to direct my path. My boss is asking for that this rain don't come here this way." I said, "But I cannot control it. You can do all things." And I believed it, too. And I said, and the word said, "You ask and believe it." That's what I got to tell. Ask and believe it. For the first time, I never had to ask him for nothing like that. I never thought I should ask him for nothing like that. But he asked me. So who am I going to go to but the Lord? That's where I'm at in my life. So I went to the Lord said, "Come on with me." I said, "Yes, sir." I went on the parade field, and he had me running around, doing a Janet thing, running around there, running around. And then after he said, okay, let's walk a little bit and walk. And then he took me, I went on back in my office. And when I got in my office, I said, now, Father, I sure hope that this is going to work itself out. And don't you know, they called me on the phone. They said, guess what's going on up out here now? And I said, what? They said, the sun is coming out little by little. And by the time they had the change of command, everybody who was coming to the affair came in with an umbrella, but they used your umbrella to shield themselves from the sun. Glory, 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 glory. I'm serious. Hi, Father. I am happy. I'm still happy about it. Because I don't know. I didn't know what to do. When all else failed, I mean, you got to know, you have somebody calling. So talking about peace, he can give you peace in the midst of anything. And I'm a living witness. So I don't want to tell you too much more, but things happen like that in my life because you're faith in your Almighty God. I know you are people of faith because that's why you're here. And I am a person of faith. But I want you to know, as he's done it for all of us, but it takes a special person, one that's got to really have faith in him. And don't lean to what you can do, because I can do absolutely nothing. Nothing. But God can do everything and anything. And I'll stand on that until God calls me home. And I'm going to be celebrating my 75th birthday this year. And you know what? I count it all joy. I have friends that will never tell you their age. That's all I want to do is tell you my age. Because God has done it. I can't do it, but God can. And I have had a lot of bad things happen to me, and I don't want to talk about a lot of them, but I have come to the conclusion people are down on what they're not up on, plain and simple. So you let them go. God gives each of us something to do, and something to hold us, and something to keep us, and something for us to know that he is God, and above him there's none other. So let them talk if they want to. I've got to say that because talk can't bother me. I have God on my side. You get him on your side, and nothing is impossible for him. And you can ask me any question when it's time. I'll be glad to answer because I have a lot of answers now that I didn't have when I was going through them. God bless you.
Thank you so much, Janet and Diana. Samantha, you have a lot to look forward to. Yeah, so we're going to hear from Samantha and really, about what this tells you hearing these stories, how it resonates with your expectations and your motivations to take on this task and this work yourself. And Samantha, I forgot to tell you, is with the United Church of Christ, so she'll be going into the ministry representing that denomination.
Well, like Jonathan said, I finished an oral history project about women in military ministry. So I really steeped myself in these kind of stories previous to now, and it just affirms everything I'd learned about what it has been and how it's been difficult. And it really affirms how blessed I've been. And the people that have supported me and the people who have stood beside me, I think I don't know if you want to call it luck or you want to call it providence, whatever you want to call it. My recruiters were amazing. They were both older men who loved the idea of me working in military ministry. And my denomination is one that sometimes is a little wary of military ministry, but always, for me, has been open to calling, period, and to people as people. Being a woman in the United Church of Christ is a celebrated thing, and I'm incredibly blessed for that. Being ordained there will be a celebrated thing. And so as far as womanhood has gone so far, I haven't had any problems, which scares me. Because I've been cocooned. I am in New England. I'm in a progressive area. I'm in a progressive denomination, and I'm in a progressive seminary. And that is not the entirety of the United States. And that is not the entirety of the chaplain corps. And I'm worried. I am, but I'm excited. There's something great about being able to stand as an example, and I really hope if someone spit on me, I would hug them. I really hope that that's what will happen. And I guess my barriers thus far have been my age, and I'm young. You can see that I'm young, and a lot of people don't like that. You don't have experience, or that's not okay. So I'm no stranger to what it looks like to stand and be a convincing presence for the divine. To, I don't want to say prove myself, because I don't think that's a good way of looking at it. But it sort of is. It's validating that you are supposed to be there. And I don't know that that's going to be so different being a female. So I look forward to the time where I am the female presence in a group of probably all men. This is the first time I have ever been in the presence of more than one female chaplain, actually. More than one. A story, I'm a chaplain candidate, so I really am just starting this process. And I'm also dating someone in the military, and he went to the Air Force Academy. And he has a female friend from the Air Force Academy who's just really been struggling, and he told her to call me. I've never met her. I was happy for her to call me. And she did not know that female chaplains existed. She had never met one. And it's just astounding to me that I, in this day and age, was that new presence for someone. This much further on the path, this far that we've come. I was the first female chaplain or chaplain candidate, not even chaplain, that she was introduced to. And it's exciting, and it's a little scary. But I look forward to seeing it grow. I look forward to being that female for the new generation. And yeah, I'm excited.
Well, I know our panelists are very excited to hear from you now. So if you'd like to ask a question or to make a comment, if you could raise your hand and somebody will bring you a microphone. And there we go, right there.
Janet, I was wondering, did the men, could they hear you preach to the dogs?
Yes, they did hear me preach. In fact, one of them said there's a biblical passage that says, preach the gospel to every creature, and we pretty much decided that's what we lived out. But to me, the most significant thing, I didn't even tell you what I felt like my most significant learning in that situation is throughout the years, I've shared that experience, and people often ask me, who was that guy that spit on you? Was he a minister? And they're very put off by that whole idea. And it was so interesting because we didn't know each other yet. This was very new in our class. And I said, I did not want to attach that to anybody. I don't see a face anymore when I think of it. And so I was grateful that God, He washes you clean in the blood of the Lamb. And I was just so grateful not to attach it to any individual. So that's not the answer you asked for, but anyway.
Okay. Another question, or in the very back.
Janet, I was wondering if you could tell us what it's like. You mentioned that there's a difficulty of being not only a woman, and of course we heard about being black and being young, but also being a Christian Scientist in a community of Christians even who aren't so comfortable with Christian Scientists in the community. Could you tell us what happened to you on 9/11 in that context?
Okay. Where you're in normal situations, people sometimes let their own human opinions kind of creep in. What we found at 9/11 was as you went in and the firemen were laying the casualties on the grass at the inner courtyard, the first thing that struck all three of us chaplains who were able to get in with the firemen was that...
This was at the Pentagon?
This was at the Pentagon, I'm sorry. And what struck us was that you don't ever assume somebody wants to pray. You will ask them, do you want to pray? And you're very respectful of other traditions. And so you ask the person, what is your tradition, so that you would pray in a manner that was meaningful to them. But the thing that struck us all was not one person said, I don't want to pray. And that nobody said, oh, I'm sorry, I couldn't pray with a woman, or the other two chaplains who were with me were minorities. And one of them was also from a fairly unusual church. And nobody asked you I think you could have been a kangaroo. If you were there and you were there to talk with them, and it might be to say the Our Father, it might be to say the Lord's Prayer, it might be you were going to meet the need of that next casualty. There was an absolute unity of effort. Everything was focused not on yourself. It was focused completely on what does that next person that is brought out need. And it was just amazing to see that in the response of the American people. I refer to that day as a defining event of love. Love you saw expressed in every possible way.
Question here.
This is a question for all three of you. I'm wondering if you could tell us, witness to us, what it's like for peace to happen in the life of someone who's in the active military service, who's in a war situation, and what your role in that is.
Yeah, I would say certainly that our role, even as a chaplain, our mission and our objective is to help any soldier or any person, even family member, to sustain their faith. Because most of us have a faith, and if they don't have a faith, introduce them to one. And then certainly to help to give them hope. They need two things for sure, faith and hope. Because all around them may seem chaotic and disturbing and sometimes useless. But if they have something to hold on to, that's what they're going to have something more than what they can see, the naked eye. They really can look at what's going on, because if you look at what's going on, you'll go where the rest of the folks are going on the other side. But you have to know full well there's something greater that is in you. That's anything that's out here in the world. You have to help them to realize that. They may have heard it when they were kids. Maybe they heard it when they were teenagers. Maybe they've never heard it. But you have to give them to know, really and truly, you can do all things. That's what I do, and it has been working. To let them know they can do all things, not on themselves, but through Christ who strengthens them. And whatever their denomination may be, take them wherever their denomination is and give them to know how they can find that faith and hold on to it. Because that faith is going to give you, help you to have hope. And hope will sustain you. Without hope, all of us will be taken down. But with hope, all things are possible. That's why I say with faith, all things is possible. And that pleases God.
I'd like to respond to that, too. A lot of people don't know that chaplains are Category 4 under Geneva Conventions. They're non-combatants. We do not carry weapons. So you're there in a very different capacity. Most of our missions while I were in the Balkans, and they were literally the name of the missions were peacekeeping or peacemaking missions, and which is illustrative of why we were there. And when you saw what you saw there, I would never even describe it. It was so graphic. But what was striking to me was when I was with the Armed Forces Chaplains Board in the Pentagon, just a few years after that, there was a Bosnian commission that came, and normally when any commission from any other nation comes to the Pentagon, they set up a standard set of briefings, and it's with the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff and all the high-ranking folks. And the Bosnians said, no, we don't want those briefings. We want to talk to your chaplain. And it blew me away because they brought all these people up, and you could see exactly who was the Croat, who was the Serb, who was the Muslim. You could tell exactly who everybody was by the way they were dressed. And they sat around the table, and they asked one question to begin with, and they said, how is it that people in America can be of so many different denominations and faith groups and backgrounds and not kill each other? And that was an honest question, a question that was deep on their heart. And if you don't know, that's when the Lord has to answer the question. And what came to me was there is nothing that we consider in the United States of America more private and more sacred than a person's relationship with God. And that any chaplain is going to do anything they can do to make sure that person can honor God in the way that they would in the military. And we feel we're a stronger nation and a stronger military if we can do that. And it was interesting because they started writing down as fast as they could. And I mean, we spent quite some time. I had an imam with me who helped talk with them, but they wanted answers of peace. They were not there to talk about. So I think the military, many times, they were looking to the chaplains because they felt they'd seen something by the way that chaplains ministered in the Balkans that was different than anything they'd seen. Hatred had governed their region, and they saw something very different.
A question here. No. Oh, here, sorry. We'll get you next.
Every summer, I'm invited to preach at an Air Force officers' retirement center in California. And one of the frequent topics is that they promote a very conservative kind of Christianity in the military, not necessarily from the chaplaincy. And so I wanted to know if any of you had any comments to make about that kind of advocacy on their part.
No, I think there's quite a few folks believe that maybe even the government tells us what to preach and how to preach, etc. But we get all of our education outside from the government, and that's in seminaries of every denomination. And we have hundreds of different denominations represented in the armed forces. And what the military, what the armed forces do is they go to the churches, and that's why they have representatives. Like Janet is representative for Christian Scientists. For my Church of God in Christ, we have a representative for Church of God in Christ. And then you get so many slots. It has been where you have so many positions that you can bring in so many chaplains, depending on how many members are part of your denomination. If you have 5 million members in your denomination, you may be authorized to have 10 chaplains or 20 chaplains or whatever. And then every denomination can have so many. And when that happens, the reason that is because if you have that many folks in your denomination, then you have so many in your military. 5% or 10% or whatever will be military folks, and they'll need someone that they can talk to and that they can rely on and that they can understand and that would understand them. So as a result of that, the military tries to supply everything that a soldier's going to need, and that is to include their spiritual life.
And I just want to clarify, for many, many years, the military chaplaincy did work on that kind of quota system. That is not the case anymore. It was struck down by the Supreme Court. But it still is very reflective of the individuals that choose to get in the military. So it's not uncommon when a church knows they have a lot of service members that are in the military. They want to make sure that they're getting chaplains nominated to serve those folks, and not just serve those folks. But I think what you find is when chaplains come in, they may be very conservative or they may be very liberal. I think what you find is that the military chaplaincy is so different that the longer they're in, the more they get to that point where they're just very, very devoted to meeting the needs of the individual where they are. And it's not that they abandon that their own personal belief might be here, but I think they get very devoted as time goes on to saying, and it's the reverse also. If you go out and do a 10-mile run with the soldiers, they'll walk through blood for you, and vice versa. And so it's more like you're our chaplain, and most of them wouldn't even know what your denomination is. Yeah. So I think that it's a bit of an unfair condensation to bring it down to something like that. What you find is that if you're that chaplain that goes with them to Bosnia or Iraq, or you're over there in Afghanistan, you're their chaplain. They probably don't even know what your denomination is. They just know that you're the person. If they have something on their heart and they want to talk, they're going to go to you.
Also, one of the first chaplains I actually met when I decided to go into chaplaincy was an incredibly conservative man and incredibly ecumenical. And I think that that's sort of what you're saying. I was a little nervous about that because the UCC does fall a little on the liberal spectrum of denominations, and it is a minority. Compared to other denominations, it's not as big. And I was scared. And I met this man who was Missouri Synod Lutheran. He was very steadfast in his beliefs of Luther's teachings, and he was happy not to do communion and to allow someone else to, because his doing communion would bar people from coming to the table. And so I think maybe it has been conservative in some places, but ecumenical takes precedence over your conservative or liberal leanings. And you serve the person rather than your denomination.
May I add one thing? I believe what makes it look as if it's conservative as opposed to being an individual denomination, because you have so many, we're representing like 100 and some denominations in the military. I can't name them all if I had to, but it's a long list of them. So you can't have all 100 and some chaplains over there in your base. So you have to bring 5 or 10 of them in together. So you don't want to just make it predominate like our worship. I wouldn't worship just like Church of God in Christ worship, because I'd run most of them away, I guess. But you have to bring some of each. You know, I have the Methodist style, the AME style, you know, the Presbyterian style. I can do it all. And you learn to do that. So, and that makes it look like we're still conservative, but then you can have times where you have your own denomination, special services. That's why they have a lot of gospel services. Every installation we have in the United States, we have a gospel service, because the gospel service folks, you can't satisfy them unless they get the gospel music and the gospel preaching, and they don't want it just real relaxed and to do type of thing. So that's why you have it like that. But I think it's a good way, because you can be everything to everybody.
We have a question right here.
I was born in Ireland, and I've spent over half my life here in the United States. And by the way, I'm a Methodist from Ireland, so we're not very many. But I am absolutely fascinated by the fact that the government is paying you to offer full-blooded, no-holds-barred Christian religious services in the army. And so my question has to do is, how does that fit with the more general sort of political theology in which, at least in America, you're supposed to have the separation of church and state? It seems like this is just a massive exception to what, in fact, is I just speak as an ignorant outsider at this stage, the massive exception to what one hears about the core of what America is about, namely the separation of church and state.
I had to write, when I was with the Department of Defense level in the Pentagon, I had to write what was called a religious support primer to sort of explain the chaplaincy, because nobody understands it. The undersecretaries didn't get it, and unless you've actually, been in contact with the chaplaincy, the other branches don't even understand it. And one of the things I said in there is it's probably one of the most amazing miracles that you'll ever see, because you have all these people of different denominations. I mean, we're just as comfortable with each other as anything. But the second point that I helped them to understand is the government can make anybody a cook, or they can teach them to be a mechanic, or they can go to a law school and say, give me an attorney, or they can even go to a medical school and say, give us a doc. But the one thing they cannot do is make somebody a clergy person. And so they have to go to the churches and say, we can't do that. Because of that separation of church and state, the government can't make somebody a clergy person. They can't train them. The only people who can ordain or endorse, or depending on whether it's a lay tradition or an ordained, is only the churches. And so in essence, they're just lending their clergy to the military. If at any point that church determines they're being asked to do something they don't want them to do, or the person is uncomfortable with what they're doing or whatever, at any moment, it doesn't matter where they are in their career, the church can pull them right back and they're theirs. And so it's a very it's being lent to the military. And again, they pay their wages because they're providing that religious support to soldiers, sailors, airmen, or Marines. But they'd pay the cook or they'd pay whomever they did to provide the services that they're needed done. I don't know if that's helpful or not.
Also, it's important to note that while the Christian voice may be predominant, which I think it is, it tends to be in America, period, it is not the only voice. There are rabbis, there are imams, there are people of other faith traditions serving in this similar capacity as a chaplain and are doing the same kind of individual, ecumenical, you serve the individual that is in front of you, the person that's in need. If a Jewish individual came to me, I would not try to minister to them in my denomination. I would try to find the best way to communicate, the best way to interact, and the best rabbi that they could talk to. So I think that's important to note as well.
We screened a film here in September called Chaplains Under Fire that specifically deals with the question that you ask. They have a website, so if you Google Chaplains Under Fire, it's under, the organization that produced the film has a different name, but you would certainly get to it easily that way. It's a film that you could buy, and there's an excerpt of about 10 minutes that you can see online. But there are groups in the United States that are very actively attacking the chaplaincy for the very concern that you were citing, and so chaplaincy, with regard to that perspective, does have to continually justify itself within this prism of, how does religion function publicly in American life. So you might be interested in that film. We have time for just one more question. So who is going to be the most Christian and let the other? Oh, you're all good Christians. You're too good. Now we...
Thank you. Thank you for concessions. I was just, as you were talking, I was thinking about the recent news story. You probably all heard about the young man, I think it was Iraq or Afghanistan, I'm forgetting which were, that went out and shot quite a few innocents. And my heart really wrenched, still does, with that story. And I guess it just raises the question for me in listening to you both, all of you talk about the ministry and the military. In terms of just, I know, for example, here in the U.S., religion, at least here in New England especially, has been kind of declining, our church presence and church going. And I'm just wondering how you see the military having changed over the years, especially those of you who were in it for a long time, and also how the chaplaincy may be received differently now or not, perhaps, but how that's changed over the years as well.
Well, I'm not certain whether or not it's changed. I believe it's about the same, but I think the world is changing. It's not just the chaplaincy. All around you, I mean, the 2-year-olders and 5-year-olders are even killing their parents. I mean, I don't understand it. So where do we go? We're part of that world. Something has to happen. And I would just believe we that know the Lord and that we believe in God, we're going to have to do more than what we have been doing because we are falling apart. I have to say it as well.
One response I might have to that question would be is that the military is a huge organization, hundreds of thousands of people. And so it pretty much represents the full spectrum of humanity. And so we aren't somehow some special thing that, actually has solved that magic thing of how you never get a person who's troubled. Or you can see ahead of time and you're clairvoyant and you understand, okay, this is the person who's not going to break or whatever. And so whatever society is wrestling with, we're going to wrestle with it in the military, which is why many times the military is on the cutting edge of any change. That's why women were integrated in the military first. It's why you see so many things that happen in the American society as a whole. It's tried out first in the military because we represent the whole spectrum. And so we don't have any immunity to not having to deal with all of the things that human beings deal with when they live an entire lifetime. And so we have to do it as ethically and as intelligently as we can when we have to respond to that. But I doubt we would still have the same judicial processes in place, and so they would reflect the same ideas as the rest of the American people.
And I'd like to add one other thing too, knowing what we know now about how many wars we've been trying to fight and we have been fighting, these young men and women have seen so much more than I have ever seen. I've been in for 20 years. And when they leave from over there and they come over here, we expect them to be human beings, but they're warped. They need a whole lot of care before they can really enter into this segment of people that are not fighting. And so when they went around killing, people already dead and they doing what they've done, you can tell they wasn't operating like sane folks anymore. And I think we're going to have to look at that. I think the government's going, and the president's going to, and everybody, they're looking at Fort Bragg even now because they know, if you know anybody that lives in Fort Bragg area, they would tell you how many men have come back really devastated, and they all have to have special kind of treatment because it's almost unbearable. They can't live with their wives. They can't see their wives like real wives anymore. They can't integrate back into the family anymore. But it's been happening because of all these fights and all the wars and stuff, and what they've had to do. Now we want them to be humans again. The military sent me to get a second master's degree. I came in with a master's of divinity, and I wanted to further my education in counseling. They sent me to go and get a second master. I got a pastoral psychotherapy, a master's of pastoral psychotherapy, and it was great. And I utilized that in counseling. I opened up family life centers for the military while I was there because they knew it was a need then, but it's getting so prevalent now that we've got to do more than what we've done then. We only had a couple wars then, but now every time we turn around, we have to go and fight and kill and then feel like it's okay. Well, then they come home and they do the same thing. They don't know the difference anymore. They may have to round up more folks to give them psychiatric treatment because it's necessary. That's the problem. These people need help. Those that have been there must have help. And I don't know whether they're paying enough attention, but I think it's going to come to the faces of the people that can make a difference and will do something about it. They don't want to be in the house at night by themselves. But we have to work on that, and hopefully it's not going to be too long.
Diana was pointing out that the soldiers have to keep rotating over there because the size of the military has been downsized and downsized, and yet the missions have been increased and increased and increased. And so there's many facets to that, and so I don't think there's any simplistic question to it. It's a very complex question.
Well, and I think maybe that's why the chaplaincy hasn't changed so much, because it's a safe place. And whether you were deployed once in a single war or now you're being deployed multiple times in the wars that continue, it's still a safe place. And I think maybe that's why it's still what it has been.
Yeah, the film I was telling you about, Chaplains Under Fire, one of the points that it brought home to me about the importance of chaplaincy and the subject of peace is that it reminds the soldiers, the airmen and the sailors, et cetera, what it is at a core level that they're really fighting for. They're not fighting to win, they're fighting to preserve something special, something that's honorable, something that's lovable. And it's that sense of honor, it's that sense of love, it's that sense of peace that the chaplaincy does provide. At the very end of Chaplains Under Fire, one of the chaplains sings a song that he wrote called Sweet Release, and it's on this very subject of the fact that the kind of paradox that although he's fighting, although he's a warrior, it is for peace that he's doing it. And the director of the film sent me this email today, and I thought it was interesting just to read a little bit of it in the context of what we've heard tonight. She writes, coincidentally, I just ran into a soldier who was in Salerno in Afghanistan at the same time in '07 as we were, and we got to talking about his chaplain. She was the only female chaplain we came across downrange. Pinky Fisher is her name. And I remembered a soldier in her unit telling me that he had insisted she perform the ceremony when he and his wife married. But you're Catholic, I said. And Chaplain Fisher is a Pentecostalist. Yes, but she's my chaplain. So it goes to show the kinds of bonds that we can forge when we keep our eye on the basics. Well, thank you so much for all that you've shared tonight. And thank you all for being here, and we look forward to having you back, I hope. We have a little hiatus in terms of this kind of programming, but we'll be starting up again, and we'll let you know about it.